Thank you, my friend. And by the way, Varick has graciously uploaded all of the most recent lectures, beginning with the piece on what is political philosophy by Strauss, all the way up to last week's lectures. So they're there. They're on the DSU, Dundee State University YouTube channel, and they're there for you. So again, thank you, Varick, man. Much love. All right. So we have some incredibly important things to do, and we need to finish the discussion that we started on Tuesday. And we finished the lecture on Tuesday with the second part of Socrates' defense against the first accusers. Remember, Socrates believes he's facing two sets of accusers, the old accusers and the new accusers. The old accusers, he means Aristophanes, and the new accusers, he means Miletus. And we spoke about last week about why, or last Thursday, about why he believes he has to respond to the old accusers and Aristophanes. And his response, or his defense, consists of his response to what he believes are the two main charges emerging out of Aristophanes' comedy, The Clouds, that Socrates teaches, corrupts the youth by teaching them philosophy, what Aristophanes called the unjust speech, and that Socrates does not believe in the gods of the city. And we were about to finish Socrates' response to the second charge. And Socrates was going to defend himself against Aristophanes' suggestion that Socrates does not believe in the gods by telling the story of Chaerephon. And that's where we ended on Tuesday. And as you will recall, I'm not going to go through the whole story again, but as you will recall, Socrates says to the jury, I'm going to tell you a story. Don't make a disturbance because it's not mine. The story is Chaerephon's. And apparently Chaerephon went to the oracle at Delphi, the most important religious and sacred spot in the Greek world, and asked the oracles at Delphi who the most wise person in Athens was. The oracle said Socrates. Chaerephon runs back to Athens and he says to Socrates, you're not going to believe this. I've been to Delphi. I asked the oracle, who is the wisest person in Athens? And the oracle said, you. And in a funny way, this is Socrates, of course. Socrates says, you're right. I don't believe you. This must be a riddle or a puzzle that the oracles are sending. And Socrates says, I don't believe it, in a kind of a playful but serious way, because Socrates is famous for saying, the one thing I know, Socrates, know, is that I don't know anything, right? That I'm aware that things like justice and friendship and love are incredibly important concepts. They're quite profound. I believe it's possible for us to acquire knowledge, and I've been on this search to acquire knowledge of these things my whole life. And even now, I can say with some humility that the one thing I know is that I don't know, and I don't know enough. So Socrates is perplexed by the riddle. How can Socrates be the wisest person in Athens if in fact he believes he doesn't know anything or very little? And of course, this is the origin of a very famous Socratic humility. And this is the origin of the philosophical humility. Philosophy, the search for knowledge, the search for wisdom, the search to expand one's consciousness and elevate one's life begins in humility. It begins in that kind of quiet humility inside of one's mind and inside of one's soul, where one recognizes that there are really important things to think about, and one may not know what one needs to know to proceed correctly in life. And so in order to answer the puzzle of the gods, Socrates tells the story of his famous journey through Athens and his questioning of people who are reputed to be wise. And by the way, this story that Socrates tells is functioning on two levels right now. The first level it's functioning is the actual response to the charge that he doesn't believe in the gods or invents new ones. So Socrates is telling the story of the journey of Chaerephon's journey to the oracle to refute Aristophanes' accusation that he doesn't believe in the gods. And two, equally as important, equally as important, he tells the story as a way of explaining why the hatred for him has developed and where the hatred for him has developed, right? And this is important because remember, we said when we were talking about Socrates' strategy, Socrates' defense strategy, we said he has two goals. One is to prove his innocence, to demonstrate that the charges are without merit, like you would expect as a defendant, but also equally as important, to try to illuminate the reasons for why, if the charges are untrue, why they've been brought, right? And Socrates wants to argue with respect to both the old accusers and the new accusers, that the charges have been brought out of a sort of hatred, out of a sort of a revenge, out of an attempt to silence Socrates, right? And so his telling of the story of Chaerephon is going to serve two purposes. One, it's going to try to refute Aristophanes' claim, going as far back from the clouds, that he does not believe in the gods of the city. And two, to use the story to illuminate the source of the hatred. Why has Socrates become hated? And so then he goes, he says, so he tells the story, and we're on page 69, right at the bottom. And he says, I will defend myself against Aristophanes' charges that I don't believe in the gods of the city, and I will also show you from whence the hatred comes. And he says, so in order to figure out what the oracle was saying, what is this puzzle the oracle is sending? He says, I went to one of those reputed to be wise, Socrates writes, on the grounds that there, if anywhere, I would refute the divination, I would refute the oracle and show the oracle, look, I've found a man who claims to be wise. He claims to be wise. He has a reputation for being wise, right? This man is wiser than I, but you, the oracle, declared that I was wisest, Socrates says. So I questioned him, and I questioned him like I questioned him Euthyphro. So I questioned him. I considered him thoroughly, is what Socrates says. He says, and Socrates says, I need not speak of him by name, but he was one of the politicians. So the first group of people that Socrates went to and discussed, right, were the politicians, and politicians who claimed to be wise themselves and who had reputations for this wisdom. And Socrates is saying, I found as many politicians as I can who thought that they were wise and had reputations for being wise, and I considered them thoroughly. I questioned them, I spoke to them, I interviewed them, I questioned them about important things like justice, like citizenship, like courage, like foreign policy issues, whatever it might have been. I considered him thoroughly. I need not speak of him by name, Socrates says, but he was one of the politicians. So he must have been someone very famous or well known. And Socrates says, for when I considered him and conversed with him, men of Athens, I was affected something like this. It seemed to me that this man seemed to be wise, both to many other human beings and most of all to himself. Again, Euthyphro, this politician he himself believed he was wise, certain in these things, both to many other human beings and most of all to himself, but that he was not. He was not. And then I tried to show him that he supposed he was wise, but was not. And so from this, I became hated. This is the beginning of the hatred. Socrates would question powerful people, influential people, people who claimed to be wise and people who had reputations to be wise. And in the process of the discussion, like Euthyphro, like we saw in Euthyphro, these people who believed that they were wise and had reputations for being wise were revealed to be not as wise as they believed. Again, in many ways, like Euthyphro, we saw a similar dynamic. After this, middle of the page, after this, then, I kept going to one after another, all of the politicians. After this, then, I kept going to one after another, all the while perceiving with pain and fear that I was becoming hated. And I got to pause here. Don't let me go on a rant on this, but this is just one of those moments that we have to pause. This is one of the most profound lines in a series of dialogues that are profound beyond belief. And here we see Socrates saying something extraordinarily important and profound and heartbreaking and true about political philosophy. And this is one of the deep themes we're talking about in this damn course. You can't have this course with me and walk away from it and not bear witness to it. Right? We see Socrates, the man who discovers the possibility of truth, dedicates his entire life to the pursuit of it selflessly, right? With total enthusiasm, with selflessness, spends 30 years inquiring people who claim to be wise on behalf of the city for the benefit of these people, for the benefit of the city, in search of knowledge that would elevate our own sense of who we are. We can become self-governing, and knowledge that could lead to justice. And here Socrates is saying that journey made me hated. All the while I was becoming aware that I was becoming hated, all the while perceiving with pain and fear that I was becoming hated. Right? And we keep returning to this theme throughout the theme and the class, and I don't want to exaggerate it. Political philosophy is heavy. It has pain associated with it. The pain of your own intellectual and spiritual journey, the pain you're going to experience when you try to have conversations with people who don't want it, who become defensive, who hate you for it. Right? And this is profound. You can't read Socrates. You can't bear witness to what is taking place without bearing witness to this. Socrates knows he spent 20 years in a kind of perceiving with pain and fear that what he was doing was making him hated. And that he was, and in becoming hated becomes an object for retribution, an object for punishment, an object for violence. And of course they kill him. And as we keep riffing on, and forgive me if I'm boring you guys to tears, but you should understand that many of you are in this process. You're fighting for racial justice. You're fighting for social justice. You're fighting for greater recognition of equality and gender equality, right? You're fighting for all of that. And what does that mean? That means you've got to go to people who claim to be wise about these things, who have power, and you've got to ask them why these things exist. And you've got to challenge them to conceive of things in a different way, and perhaps a more elevated way. And sometimes that's going to work. Sometimes people are going to hear you and they're going to say, fuck, that's great. Let's go on this journey. And other times they're not going to want to hear it. And they're going to resist. And power is going to move back on you. There's no escaping that. Political philosophy is dangerous. Thinking is fucking dangerous, you guys. Political philosophy is dangerous. It holds out a tremendous promise for elevation and transformation, but that journey is inescapably wrought with pain and suffering. It is. It's also wrought with joy and self-discovery and elevation, right? It has those things. But here is Socrates recognizing that for 20 years, I perceiving all the time with pain and fear that I was becoming hated. Nevertheless, and by the way, the nevertheless is for you. If you ever ask yourself when you're on the streets protesting, when you're doing what you're doing in the political activism and the organizing and the talking, and trying to get fucking people to listen. If you ever say to yourself, why am I doing this? Read this line. This is why you're doing it. Socrates says, but nevertheless, it seemed to be necessary to regard the truth as most important. That's why you're doing this. So I had to go on in considering what the oracle was saying to all those who reputed to know something. And by the dog, I love that phrase, by the dog, right? Socrates says, men of Athens, for it is necessary to speak the truth before you. I swear I was affected something like this. Those with the best reputation seem to me nearly to be the most deficient. The people who are the most arrogant, who believe themselves to be the most wise in this weird democratic way, who have this reputation for being most wise, they're the ones that ended up being the most deficient. Bottom of page 70. After the politicians, I went to the poets, those of the tragedies and the comedies and the others, in order that there I would catch myself in the act of being more ignorant than they. So I would take up their poems. I would take up Aeschylus's Prometheus Bound, Sophocles' Antigone, Aristophanes' The Clouds. I would take up their plays. I would take up those poems of theirs, which it seemed to me they had worked on the most. And I would ask them thoroughly what they meant, so that I might also learn something from them. I am ashamed to tell you the truth, men of Athens. Nevertheless, it must be said. Almost everyone present, so to speak, in the audience, right? This is one of the great intellectual takedowns in Western civilization. Almost everyone present in the audience, so to speak, would have spoken better than the poets did about the poetry they themselves wrote, right? So the poets were particularly ignorant because they couldn't explain anything about what they were talking about. And then finally, we need to move this along, middle of page 71, Socrates. I went to the manual artisans, the people who make houses, who build ships, who tan leather and cur steel. I went to the manual artisans. And it turns out, the funny thing there, he says, of all the people in the city who claim to know something, the politicians and the poets and the craftsmen, of all the people in the city, all the groups who claim to know something, it turns out that the only people who actually know anything are the manual artisans, because they can actually do what they say. They can actually build a house. They can build a ship. They can navigate by the stars. They can tan leather. They can cur steel. They can do things, right? However, Socrates says, unfortunately, it turns out, Socrates says, that knowledge about these sorts of things does not help one know how to live well, right? These sorts of knowledges, building houses and incurring steel and tanning leather, these sorts of knowledges, while incredibly important to be sure, don't tell you how to live well at the end of the day. And so Socrates says, at the end of the day, I spent the last 20 years going at great sacrifice to myself, at great poverty to myself, at great harm to myself. I spent the last 20 years interviewing the people in the city who claim to be wise. And it turns out that nobody is wise. And nobody is wise because the Homeric traditions themselves are, as Socrates is going to say, are objectively false. And they provide a kind of knowledge about important things that leads to crisis rather than solutions. And so on the bottom of page 71, Socrates says, look, this is the examination, men of Athens, from which I have incurred many hatreds, the sort that are harshest and gravest, so that many slanderers have risen against me. So with respect to the second of the charges from the old accusers, from Aristophanes, right, Socrates says it's untrue that I don't believe in the gods of the city. I've spent my whole life, Socrates says, in service to the gods. I've spent my whole life going around the city at great risk, at great harm, at great sacrifice to myself, trying to solve the riddle of the gods. How can you, Aristophanes, suggest that I don't believe in the gods when in fact I believe in them enough to have spent my life trying to discover the truth of their prophecy? Now, to be sure, some of this may be ironical, right? This is Socrates after all, right? But as a defense, it's a very useful defense. right? It's hard for Aristophanes and anybody associated with the old accusers to somehow suggest that Socrates doesn't believe in the gods. So, with respect to the old accusers, let's wrap this up. With respect to the old accusers, with respect to the first charge, that Socrates somehow corrupts the youth by teaching them philosophy, which Aristophanes thought was the unjust speech, making the weaker speech the stronger, and therefore corrupting youth and bringing damage to families and cities, right? Socrates, is he innocent or guilty? Well, he's innocent because no one would stand up and corroborate Aristophanes' charges. Remember, Socrates says, I offer all of you the opportunity to stand up and give testimony. And of course, nobody did. There was silence. And then with respect to the second charge, does Socrates not believe in the gods, right? Again, in this attempt at this tribal conception of justice. And Socrates tells the story of Chaerephon and how Chaerephon went to the oracle. The oracle said Socrates was wisest, and Socrates spent 20 years trying to sort of understand the riddle. And so with respect to both charges, Socrates is fairly innocent, right? It's really hard to find him guilty on these charges. And by telling the story of Chaerephon, he has begun the process of showing that the charges have been generated by a kind of hatred, by a kind of desire to wreak revenge on Socrates for humiliating all of these powerful people, right? Now, let's transition to the second set of accusers, okay? Let's go ahead and transition to the second set of accusers. And on page 73, Socrates signals to us, the readers, and to the audience that he's transitioning to the next set. And so he says on the top of page 73, so he says, about the things which the first accusers accuse me of, let this be a sufficient defense speech before you. So Socrates is finished responding to the old accusers. And now he's going to turn his attention to Miletus, the person who has actually brought the charges. Okay? So, about the things which the first accusers accused me of, let this be a sufficient defense speech before you. Okay, so he's signaling, he's transitioning. We're now going to see Socrates' defense against the second set of accusers. All right, now he says, but against Miletus, he says, but against Miletus, the quote, good and patriotic, unquote, as he says, and the latter accusers, Anytus and Lycon, I will try to speak next in my defense. Okay, now we got to stop here, right? And again, don't let me rant, but we've got to just kind of, again, bear witness to something profound. And in the sentence that I just read is the entire reason for the origin of political philosophy and the entire history of political philosophy. If you ever had any question about the origin of political philosophy or what the hell political philosophy is about, what the hell this class is about, in one way or another, what the hell all the classes I teach are about, they're all political philosophy. If you ever had any question about that, it is answered in this sentence. The answer. And at some point before the dialogue starts, because when we read the dialogue and Socrates is already up speaking. But the way Socrates has phrased this sentence, right, we're led to believe that at some point before the actual dialogue that we're reading starts, Miletus has already stood up and he's given a kind of opening statement, right? We can deduce from the way the sentence reads that some point in the day already, Miletus has stood up and Miletus has given a kind of opening remarks, because Socrates says, but against Miletus, comma, the quote, good and patriotic, unquote, as he says. and the later accusers I will try to speak next in my defense. So at some moment, right, Miletus has stood up. And in his opening remarks, Miletus has presented himself to the jury as what kind of person? A good
Patriotic.
and patriotic. Bam, bam, right? Miletus has stood up in front of the jury and said, I'm a good and patriotic person. And because I'm a good and patriotic, and by patriotic mean good person, good citizen, because I'm a good person, because I'm a good citizen, I'm bringing these charges against Socrates. And this this is, again, so many, this is the most important line, right? I say that too much, I'm sorry. But this is another one of those, right? Socrates has stood up and presented himself as a good person, as a moral person, as a good person, and as a good citizen. Now, everything in the world depends on whether Miletus is right. Right? And if you want to know what the origin of political philosophy is, that is the origin of political philosophy. What the hell does it mean to be a good person? And what the hell does it mean to be a good citizen? That is what political philosophy is. And in one way or another, in the ancient, modern, postmodern, in one way or another, for 2,000 years, political philosophy has been obsessed with two questions. What the hell does it mean to live well? What does it mean to be a good person? And by the way, who the fuck knows? Pardon my language. And what does it mean to be a good citizen? What does it mean to be just? And what does it mean to live in justice with others? In fact, those two questions are what set political philosophy in motion with Socrates. And those two questions are the defining questions of all of political philosophy. So if you're ever questioning what the hell political philosophy is, it's right there. It's obsessed with two questions. What does it mean? Who the hell are we? What does it mean to be a good person? What does it mean to live well? What does it mean to become self-governing? And how do we live well together in justice? What does it mean to be a good citizen? Now, not only is this line important because it explains the origin of political philosophy, and it explains in one way or another what political philosophy has been about for 2,000 years. It is not only important for that, but it's also important in the most profound sense. Because everything in a human life, and everything in the life of a city depends on whether or not the person making this statement, I'm a good person and I'm a good citizen. Everything depends on whether that person is right or wrong. Really, and it sounds so ridiculous, but this is where it begins and this is where it ends. Miletus stands up in front of 500 jurors and several thousand Athenian citizens, and he says, I'm a morally good person. I know what the hell it means to be a good person. I know something about being a good person. And I know something about being a good citizen. And it's precisely because I have such knowledge, such precise knowledge to vibe Euthyphro, that I have undertaken this series of events. I have brought these charges against Socrates because I know he's not a good person. And I know he's not a good citizen. And so there are two things happening. One, the question is just in terms of an academic question. What the hell does it mean to be a good person? But two, in the more practical sense, right? What if Miletus is wrong? What if Miletus is wrong about what it means, what he thinks it means to be a good person, and what he thinks it means to be just, to be a good citizen? And by the way, We don't have to go far to see a current example of this. We're in a political crisis. And without being ideological about it, I don't give a damn about ideology. But Donald Trump claims to be a good person and a good citizen. He claims to be a good person and a patriotic person. I'm a good person, in some moral sense, whatever that means. And by the way, I'm very patriotic. All you people who kneel at the national anthem, that's not patriotic. You hate America. Okay. And again, I'm not being ideological. I'm just giving you a contemporary example. Here is a contemporary example of someone in power who claims to be a good person and to be a good citizen. And this is the single most important question of human life. Is that person right? And if he or she isn't right, what are the consequences? What are the consequences of people being ignorant about these things? And that's where we are. That's what this whole damn class is about. It's what political philosophy is about in its origin. In one way or another, the entire history of political philosophy is about this question. Do you know what it means to be a good person? How to live well, and how to live well with others? Justice, as a kind of justice. If the ideas in your head about those things are wrong, we're in trouble. One, you're in trouble. You're going to be in crisis. And two, the city's going to be in trouble. The city's going to be in crisis. It's that simple. But against Miletus, Socrates says, the quote, good and patriotic, he says, as he says. Nothing's changed. There's a direct line between Athens at Socrates' trial and 2 weeks before the most important presidential election in American history since the Civil War, since the fucking Lincoln-Douglas debates. Straight line. Straight line. Questions are exactly the same. The consequences are equally as important. And you know this because your city's on fire. Our city is on fire. But against Miletus, the good and patriotic, as he says, I will try to speak next in my defense. And then, like he did with respect to Aristophanes, he paraphrases the charges. Now again, Socrates says, just as though these were other accusers, let's take up their sworn statement. It is something like this. Miletus's charges assert that Socrates does injustice by corrupting the young people and by not believing in the gods in whom the city believes, but in other daimona, other gods that are new. The charges of this sort. Now, before Socrates, again, this is Socrates, right? Like you make your head swim. Before Socrates actually begins his defense, which we'll see in just a second, his defense starts with a very aggressive offense. Socrates goes right after Miletus. And again, in going right after Miletus, illuminates what is at stake. And Socrates says, now he, Miletus, right in the middle of the page, 73, he, Miletus, he asserts that I do injustice by corrupting the young. But Socrates says, right? And now Socrates is the gloves are off. Socrates is going at him. But I, Socrates, I assert that Miletus does injustice in that he jokes in a serious matter, easily bringing human beings to trial, pretending to be serious and concerned about things for which he never cared at all. So this is extraordinary because one, we've got the two questions. what the hell does it mean to be a good person, and what the hell does it mean to be a good citizen, and whether or not the person who claims to know those things really knows them. And now we've got the second issue here, which is even more disturbing, is Socrates' suggestion that the real injustice here, the real injustice is at the end of the day, not just the big question about what the hell does it mean to be a good person and what is justice. The real injustice, as Socrates will try to reveal, is that in this surreal way, which, by the way, it's not surreal because it's real, and it's real for us, in this surreal yet real way in which Socrates is saying the real injustice here is that this is a joke to Miletus, right? This is an attempt to harm me. This is an attempt to silence me. This is a joke. Miletus doesn't know what makes young people good. And by the way, he doesn't fucking care. He pretends to care. He pretends to know things that he doesn't. And he pretends to care about people he doesn't.
Professor?
Yes.
Just to double check, Miletus is the one accusing Socrates of corrupting the youth, correct?
Yes, of course. He's the accused. He's the main accuser.
Okay.
So this is even more disturbing than just the big question, what does it mean to be a good person and what does it mean to be a good citizen? Socrates is suggesting, look, the real injustice here is that you have people running around like Miletus, or in our society, got lots of people running around in our society who claim to know things they probably don't, and claim to care about people they don't. And I'm gonna probably lose my job for this, but you guys, as young people in a university, as citizens at the end of the American democratic experience, probably appreciate this. Are you in a university that is run by people who claim to know what they should be teaching you? Should we eliminate ethnic studies? Should we eliminate gender studies? Do they know what they claim to know? What is it? What should we be teaching young people to make them good people? Huh, that's a fucking head question. You should ask somebody that question. And by the way, are we in a university or a culture where people pretend to care about you? As students, as citizens. Donald Trump claims to know what it means to be a good person, and he claims to care about people. Every politician does. I'm not just beating up on Donald Trump. Every politician does. The question is, do they really know what's good for you, what's good in general, and therefore what's good for young people, as presidents of universities, as mayors of cities, as senators of states, as presidents of countries? Do they know what's good for young people, what's good for people? And by the way, do they care? Or are they joking? Is the whole damn thing a kind of joke? Are they jesting to know things they don't? Even if they believe they do. And are they jesting and caring about people they don't? Now we're in the heart of darkness. And this is what Socrates is really driving on right now. This is the question. Does Miletus really know what's good for young people? And does he really care? And you can take Socrates' accusation, his questioning of Miletus' knowledge and intention, and you can apply it to your life. You should, you must. You should ask your university president this question. You should ask your elected representatives this question. You should ask your professors this question. The fuck do I know? Do I really know what's good for you? And do I care? You should be asking me that all the time. You should be pressing me on it all the time. That's your responsibility. And by the way, that's a whole part of philosophy. That's the journey. That's part of the journey. So Socrates says, here's the real injustice. Now he asserts that I do injustice. Meletus has accused me of being unjust by corrupting young people. But I assert that Meletus is unjust in that he jests in a serious manner, easily bringing human beings to trial, pretending to be serious and concerned about things for which he never cared. Holy smokes. If there are people in positions of power in the city, in the university, wherever, in the corporation, doesn't matter. If there are people in positions of power who don't know what they claim to know and don't care about the people they claim to care about, we're ruined. Nothing escapes the importance of these questions in this moment. So let's find out if Meletus knows what he thinks he knows, and let's find out if he really gives a damn about young people. Because as we said with Euthyphro, what feels like 100 years ago, for God's sake, if you don't really know what you think you know, Euthyphro, and if you didn't really care about the things you claim to care about, you wouldn't be doing this. So Socrates says, all right, let's find out. And Socrates says, and on page 74, Socrates says to Meletus, okay, so Meletus, you have discovered, Socrates says this to Meletus, you have discovered, Meletus, what corrupts young people, namely me, Socrates. You have thought very deeply about what is good for young people, and because you've thought very deeply about what is good for young people, you have also thought deeply about what corrupts them, and you've identified me as the corrupter. So Socrates says, okay. Obviously, you know something. You're able to identify me as a corrupter of young people. So obviously, you must know something about what corrupts young people. And because, as you've claimed to be a good person, you must know something about what is good for people. So Socrates says, so Meletus, tell me. But tell me, Meletus, what makes young people good? And of course, Meletus doesn't have an answer. He hasn't thought this through. And he's pushed by Socrates. And Meletus says, well, the laws make young people good. Meletus says the laws. Socrates says, what makes people good? What makes young people good? How do we educate students to make them the best possible people they can be? And what does Meletus say? The laws. And Socrates says, I didn't ask you that. I'm not asking this. I'm not asking what makes young people better. I'm asking who, what human beings, but rather what human beings it is it who knows, first of all, these very things, the laws, right? So Socrates says, what makes people better? And Meletus says the laws. And Socrates says, but I'm not asking you about things. I'm asking about people, who makes them better and who corrupts them. And Meletus says, well, these men, the judges. And Socrates says, what are you saying, Meletus? Are these men here able to educate the young people? And do they make them better? And of course, Meletus says, very much so. Right? One, it's already obvious he hasn't thought deeply about these issues. And he's already answering in a reactive, knee-jerk reaction to Socrates. And so Meletus says, very much so. And then Socrates says, well, all of them, or some of them, and some not? And Meletus says, well, all of them make them better. Oh, well said, Socrates says. And you speak of a great abundance of benefiters. What then? Do the listeners here make them better? Meletus, these two. Socrates, and what about the councilmen? The councilmen too, Meletus says. Well, Meletus, then surely those in the assemblymen, they do not corrupt the youth, or do all those two make them better? And Meletus says, those two. And Socrates says, then all the Athenians, as it appears, make young people noble and good except me, and I alone corrupt them. Is this what you are saying? And Meletus and Socrates says, I do say this most vehemently, most seriously. Okay. So, first of all, it's absolutely clear Meletus has no idea what is good for young people. What makes them better? The laws. I didn't ask you what, who. Well, the judges. Well, do some judges do a better job than others at this? No, all the judges. And what about the assembly here? Them too. And what about the councilmen? Them too. Oh. What about the citizens of Athens? Oh, them too. So everybody in the city of Athens benefits young people, educates young people by teaching them the laws / traditions of the city. So that is Meletus's thoughtful response to what makes young people good, what elevates young people. He hasn't thought anything about it. And so Socrates says to him, well, okay, that's an answer. Now let's test it. Let's see what kind of answer it is. And Socrates says, think about it like this. And he's saying to the jury, he's saying to the audience, think about it like this. What if you, or as a father, were about to go and you saved up your money, you worked very hard, and the war on Sparta is happening, and your 16-year-old son is on his way, getting ready to go to war. And you've worked very hard, and you've saved up all your money, and you're going to take this money and you're going to go buy a horse. You're going to buy a horse. Not a perfect analogy here, but this is what Socrates is getting at. You're going to go buy a horse, and you're going to buy a horse because you think that buying a horse is going to help your son come back. Probably not. Going to go fight the Spartans, for God's sake. The chances of you coming back are almost zero. But you think you can increase the chances by buying a horse, Socrates says. I'm kind of developing the story here, of course. Obviously, this is not in the book. But Socrates says, so you're going to go buy a horse. And he says, what's the first thing you do? Even you, what's the first thing you do? You've got your money, you go down to the farm to buy the horse, and what's the first thing you do? And obviously the first thing you do, even you and I, as normal people would do, is we would look for naturally occurring qualities that we think, even with our basic intelligence, our basic knowledge about what the hell a horse is, we look for naturally occurring qualities that we think are necessary in a horse that's going to take my kid into war. All right, so we're there at the horse farm and we're looking around, and what are we looking for? We're looking for horses that are strong. We're looking for horses that are fast. We're looking for horses that are calm, because thousands of people are going to be dying, and there's going to be screaming and body parts flying over the place, and you need a horse that's calm during this because it's going to be chaotic. So you're looking for a horse that is strong and fast and calm. Like, okay, these are the kind of qualities you want in a horse. that a good horse, an excellent horse. And then you come home and Socrates says to him, what's the next thing you do? What's the next thing you do? Do you yourself train the horse? Do you invite your neighbors to come and help you train the horse? Because a horse needs a little training before it's going to carry your kid into battle. Or do you, in fact, do a Google search on your ancient cell phone and look for a horse trainer? Look for somebody who knows something about how to train horses. Right? Do you train the horse yourself, or do you hire someone that you recognize that has knowledge about horses and specifically about how to develop the specific qualities in the horse that we want developed so the horse is excellent? Do you train it yourself? Do you invite your neighbors to train it? Or do you hire someone that you recognize possesses knowledge? And of course, the obvious answer is, and Socrates is explaining this story to Meletus and the jury, the obvious answer is you hire the trainer. The last thing in the world that you would do as a parent who's just spent all this money on the horse that's going to take your kid into battle is train it yourself, because you're an accountant, or you're a teacher, or you bake cakes, build houses. You don't know anything about training a horse. You knew enough to recognize naturally occurring qualities in the horse that you think will make a good horse, an excellent horse. Okay, that's good. But when it comes to cultivating those qualities, you don't know how to do it. And your neighbors don't know how to do it. If you train the horse and the neighbors train the horse is not going to be trained well, and your son's not coming back. So Socrates says at the end of the day, if your son was a horse, it's exactly the opposite, Meletus. Right? Because Meletus's argument, at the end of Meletus's argument was the many benefits, right? Everybody in Athens benefits young people by teaching them the laws. The many benefit and the one corrupt, right? The many benefit by teaching the laws to young people, and the one corrupts, that's Socrates. But on Socrates' cross-examination, it's exactly the opposite, right? It's the one that benefits and the many that corrupts. If we're talking about educating young people, if we're talking about training horses, right? Socrates shows through the horse example that it's more likely that the many corrupt and the one benefits. And so Meletus's position, one, he has not thought about it at all. He clearly doesn't know anything about what makes young people good. So obviously he's never thought about it, so he actually doesn't give a damn about what makes young people good. And it turns out, when you think about his position, the many benefit and the one corrupt, in the example of the analogy of the horse trainer, it's exactly, Meletus is 180 degrees wrong. Meletus is as wrong as a human being can get. It's not the many that benefit, it's the one. And most often, it's the many that corrupt. And again, not even intentionally. It's not like they're, it's not like if you were the father and you invited the neighbors to train the horse, it's not like you're intentionally corrupting the horse. You think you know what you're doing, but you don't know anything about training horses. You don't know anything about cultivating the naturally occurring qualities that make an excellent horse. So you don't even have to be ill-intentioned to do bad things. And in fact, the tragedy of human life is many people who are well-intentioned but ignorant end up doing a great deal of damage. In fact, that's most of the damage done to you as people. That's why you're in therapy, right? That's why the hell we're all in therapy. Our parents didn't intend to do the damage. Of course not. They thought they were helping us, or they were working through their own problems. But here we are. So at the end of the day, Miletus is absolutely wrong. His position, the many benefit and the one corrupt, is absolutely wrong. It's wrong about horses and it's wrong about human beings. The people who know, and they know because they've spent their life thinking about knowledge about these things, those are the ones that should be educating young people. And so Socrates gets Miletus to acknowledge two things. One, that there are naturally occurring qualities that living things possess, horses and humans. There are naturally existing qualities that horses and humans possess that are directly related to their potential excellence. And what the hell is that in human? You are a rational creature. You and I have reason. Reason is a naturally occurring capacity that is directly related to our potential excellence. And if we're going to cultivate that naturally occurring capacity called reason in pursuit of human excellence, in pursuit of living well, we better find people who know how to cultivate it. And Socrates is arguing those people are the philosophers. So Miletus has not thought deeply about what it means to benefit young people. He doesn't give a damn about benefiting young people. And the actual answer he gave is 180 degrees wrong. Miletus could not be more wrong and more unjust. And yet here we are. Socrates is going to die in 6 days. Here we are. Now, as you can imagine, at this point in the trial, Miletus is becoming very, very anxious. He is being revealed to be ignorant. And not only is he being revealed to be ignorant, what Socrates said earlier is true. The real injustice here is that Miletus pretends to know things and care about people he doesn't. And so Socrates says on the bottom of page 75, but in fact, men of Athens, what I was saying is already clear, that Miletus never cared about these things, either much or little. Nevertheless, speak to us. How do you say that I corrupt the youth? And Miletus is getting very anxious and he's getting very unstable intellectually because he's coming apart in front of several thousand people. If you can imagine this, he's being deconstructed. I'm using that word improperly, but he's being deconstructed in front of several thousand people. And Socrates recognizes this. Socrates sees that Miletus is getting wobbly under his feet. And Socrates seizes on it. And Socrates moves to the next charge. So, Socrates says, well, perhaps you meant by corrupting the youth that I teach them not to believe in the gods of the city. So he shifts from the charge Socrates is unjust because he corrupts the youth to Socrates doesn't believe in the gods of the city. Top of page 76. Or is it clear, according to the indictment that you brought, Miletus, that it is by teaching young people not to believe in the gods in whom the city believes, but in other daimona that are novel? Do you not say that it is by teaching these things that I corrupt them? And of course, Miletus can't think clearly anymore. He's kind of in an intellectual vertigo. And he says, I certainly do say this most seriously. And Socrates says, then before these very gods, Miletus, about whom our speech now is, speak to me and to these men still more plainly. For I am not able to understand whether you are saying that I teach them, young people, to believe that there are gods of some sort. And so I myself do believe that there are gods, and I'm not completely atheistic and do not do injustice in this way, but that I do not believe in those in whom the city believes, but in others. And this is what you charge me with, that I believe in others. And then Socrates knows he has him, and Socrates says, or Meletus, do you assert that I myself do not believe in gods at all, and that I teach this to others? And Meletus, in his confusion, in the fact that he's completely unprepared, in the fact that this whole trial is a total sham, says, that is what I say, Socrates, that you do not believe in gods at all. So, Meletus has forgotten his charge. The original charge, Socrates does not believe in the gods of the city or in other daimona. And now, in his confusion under Socrates' cross-examination, Meletus changes the charge and says Socrates doesn't believe in gods at all. So he's completely come apart under cross-examination and in this kind of intellectual vertigo. He's having a panic attack. And Socrates seizes on this immediately. He says, what is this? What sort of insanity is this? Do you accuse me of not believing in the gods of the city, but in other gods? Or in fact, do you accuse me of not believing in God at all? Oh, you do. Okay, it's the last one. You accuse me of not believing in God at all. But I've just said that I do. The hell is going on here? And Socrates says, wondrous Meletus, why do you say this? Top of page 77. You, Socrates says to Meletus, you are unbelievable, Meletus, even as you seem to me to yourself. This man, he says, Socrates says to the jury, pointing at Meletus, this man seems to me, men of Athens, to be very hubristic and unrestrained, arrogant and ignorant. Meletus, men of Athens, Socrates says, seems to me to be very arrogant and unrestrained, and simply to have brought this indictment with a certain arrogance and aggressiveness and youthful rashness. So, a few more minutes and let's structure the rest of the dialogue. So clearly at this point, with respect to the new accusers, Meletus, with both charges, corrupting the youth and inventing new gods, is Socrates innocent or guilty? He's pretty innocent. Meletus doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. It turns out, on reflection, using the horse analogy, that Meletus' answer is 180 degrees wrong. And in the middle of cross-examination, Meletus forgets his original charge. So Meletus has completely come apart. And it's looking pretty good for Socrates. In fact, the day's looking really good for Socrates. With respect to the old accusers and the new accusers, the preponderance of evidence is pretty strong that Socrates is innocent. In fact, there's really no evidence to charge him for anything. And at this point, Socrates should sit down and shut up. At this point, Socrates should sit down and say to the jury, I rest my case. Vote. At this point, Socrates should sit down and shut up. In fact, at this point, Socrates violates the principal law of all defense law. The principal law of all defense law is, one, if you don't have to speak, don't. Two, if you do have to speak, say as little as humanly possible, and then shut up. And at this point, Socrates should rest his case. But he doesn't. Socrates is going to use this trial and use what's left in the day to explain the philosophical way of life. Right? Socrates will spend the rest of the trial explaining his philosophical way of life. And by the way, because somebody asked him, someone in the audience, the jury says, well, Socrates, if you thought we were conducting ourselves improperly, or you wanted to speak to us about these things, why didn't you come to us earlier? They say. And Socrates says, because if I would have come to you earlier in this fashion, in this public fashion, you would have killed me a long time ago. And then there's the very famous passage on 81. Because, as I said, Socrates has done a pretty good job defending himself. The jury is sitting there thinking, what the hell is this trial about? Socrates, there's a kind of a block in the jury that's kind of sympathetic. And someone says, well, look, Socrates, help us out here. Help us out. If you agree to stop philosophizing, if you agree to stop talking, we'll let you go. We'll let you go. If you agree to stop philosophizing, we will let you go. And Socrates says, no, I don't believe I've done anything wrong. I will not stop philosophizing. And not only will I not stop philosophizing, but Socrates says, but I'm the best thing that's ever happened to you. He says, I'm the best thing that's ever happened to you. I'm like the gadfly, he says. I'm like this gadfly that Athens is like this horse, this powerful, noble, but corrupted horse. And I'm like this gadfly that comes and stings the horse into a kind of an awareness. So I will not stop philosophizing. One, because I don't think I've done anything wrong. And two, not only do I not think I've done anything wrong, I'm a gift to you. I'm the best thing that's happened to you. And he says, if you kill me, he says, if you kill me, you'll be doing more harm to yourself. And this upsets the jury. It offends them because they were trying to give him a way out. And Socrates has spurned him. And not just spurned their offer, but said to them, I'm the best thing that's happened to you. If you kill me, you'll be doing more harm to yourself than to me. You will have the infamy of killing Socrates. You will be remembered by history. Infamously remembered for killing Socrates. And so they vote and they find him guilty. They sentence him to death. We will pick up the Credo on Thursday. Have a great day. We'll see you guys Thursday.